Hey, folks, this is Mark Devine with the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me today. Super stoked to have your attention, which I don't take for granted, given all that's vying for your attention. So I really appreciate you being here. And joining us on the Unbeatable Mind podcast, today's guest is Tom Steding. We're going to talk about emotional leadership, emotional development. How do you build a team that's built on trust? It's going to be a fantastic discussion, something near and dear to my heart. So big, kind of at the center post of what we're doing with Unbeatable Mind with our vertical leadership and team development program. Before I introduce Tom a little bit deeper, it's very helpful if you review this podcast. We have a ton of 5-star reviews on Amazon, and that helps other people find it. Also helps you refer it, for other people to find it. But the reviews are really important. So if you enjoy what I'm doing and the guests we have and the conversations we have, then take a little moment if you can and review it on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, wherever it's wherever you listen to it, basically. So that's very helpful. And I also want to put a note here that if you enjoy my books, it's also helpful to review them. Hoo-yah. And that's pretty much at Amazon. All right, enough on that. So Tom's, he's been teaching leaders. He's been building companies and teams for many years now. He's been a CEO of more than 12 high-tech companies. He's chairman of several others. He works with startups at Stanford on an elite team of advisors. They call the SEAL Team at Stanford, which is pretty cool. He's a founding member of the Silicon Valley Angel Group. I was part of the San Diego Angel Group for a while, and that's pretty cool. So obviously he's into investing and supporting leaders, entrepreneurs, and founding teams. He's a co-founder of the Mayfield Alliance with a former Facebook exec named Bertrand, author of Built on Trust, Gaining Competitive Advantage in Any Organization. And then his newer book, Real Teams Win, What Smart Leaders Need to Know Now About Achieving Peak Performance. Awesome. So we got a lot to talk about, Tom. Welcome. You're coming in from Lake Tahoe.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. How's the lockdown been treating you?
Oh, it's been fine. We just had a nice snowfall last night, so everything's white, and
Awesome.
So it's a pretty good place to be right now.
Are you up there pretty much permanently, or are you going back and forth?
Yeah, we had a home in the Bay Area and the home up here, and decided when the kids went to college that we had multiple dwelling disorder. Focused in on one. And I was actually running a company in Tahoe at the time, so it was an obvious choice. But we love it. We live in a national forest, so it's fantastic.
What town are you near, or what ski area?
Between Homewood and Sunnyside.
Okay.
On the West Shore.
Sure. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I always start by just kind of like getting a sense for formative years. Like, what got you engaged in heading down this path? What were your, early influences in life that really, triggered this passion for leadership and team development?
I talk about this in the foreword. I had some wonderful friends who were advising me on the book, and one of them kept beating me up about telling my story, and I said, "The story's boring." She whacked me upside the head enough times.
No story is boring, right, Tom? When you really get
So I wrote the story, and I looked at it and said, "Holy cow, it really makes sense." But it's sort of like I have an innate interest in leadership and making things better. Mm-hmm. And, improving the system around me. That's probably rooted in early childhood experiences of some kind, some of which I mentioned in the book. And then my career is a succession of attempts to find that leadership style that works. And it's been a journey in depth. It goes deeper and deeper. And it starts out at the intellectual level, mm-hmm. PhD in control theory from Berkeley.
What is that, by the way? Let's pause there. I've never heard of control theory.
It's a mathematical optimization of physical systems. So the very mathematical area, and it's powerful. It worked really well, and they've come up with some great stuff. But optimal control, neither leadership of people has nothing to do with optimal nor control. So
right. That's where my mind was going. It's like,
So yeah, so
I could see that work for management systems, but for leadership, it's completely disconnected a little bit.
Yeah. So 10 years later, my company sent me to the Stanford Sloan program. It was a 1-year mid-career program. It was a fantastic program. And so I learned strategy, and then I went on to learn project, a bunch of stuff. It's in sort of decade-long chunks of trying something and not finding something that really got to the essential aspect of leadership until, in the last 20 years. And that's when I discovered this material that's in the book, working with another partner, and had to write it down because it really works. I really got to the deeper hidden factors and layers in the organization and able to characterize those for the benefit of the reader.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's interesting. Most people don't know this, but I was actually in a doctoral program in leadership at the University of San Diego, and I had invested for 4.5 years and had about 90%. I was doing my doctoral prep. I forget what that course is, dissertation prep. I had my dissertation subject all lined up and the team and everything. And then I got recalled to go to war, which doesn't usually happen to doctoral students.
Yeah, right.
And when I was in Iraq, I had a lot of time to reflect upon where I was heading with that and the experience that I was, just kind of like blindly going through. And what I came up with is that, and no disrespect to USD, but the professors in the leadership program really knew nothing about leadership, but they knew a lot about leadership theory.
Right, exactly.
It reminds me of like philosophers. Philosophers today know a lot about theory of philosophy, but they don't put it into practice, so they don't really understand philosophy. Same thing with leadership. If you're not practicing it, and as you talk about in your book, it's the practice of leadership is very, very distinct and often devoid of any reality from what they're talking about in the theory.
Exactly.
It's all about the emotional development and connecting at a deeper level with human beings.
Exactly right.
Right.
Exactly
that's
right.
when I made the decision to leave that program and come back and start my business to actually develop leaders. And that's been a long trial and error. So it sounds like we have a lot in common in that regard. It's interesting.
Boy, it's perfect. Yeah.
So what were some of your kind of major discoveries or insights in terms of what makes leaders more effective? And then let's get into teams as well. And let's really see if we can peel the onion on some of these things to help the listeners grow their teams and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me describe it this way. Let's start with the title of the book, Real Teams Win. The distinction, of course, is between real teams and pretend or fake teams, which is the vast majority of the cases. I've been CEO of 13 startups, in many cases come in to take over a company that's been in operation for a couple of years or longer. And you talk to the team and they say, yeah, we believe in teamwork, this is great and so forth. And under further examination, you discover they don't communicate. They don't trust each other. They don't like each other. There's slippage, toxic gossip, and the culture, characterized by fear. So the approach to building real teams then, so how do you do that? Well, it's a new leadership model. And in the context of the new leadership model, we're able to deliver that. So the new leadership model is an art form, and also the promise of the book about how you actually implement that. But the old model is a hierarchical command and control, tell and sell, top-down approach that views the organization as it's a machine metaphor.
Right.
And views the organization from the outside, no concern about the inner life of the team. The new model is more of a network of nodes, and the links and those nodes are people or teams, and their connecting links are not reporting relationships, but rather open paths of high trust, safe, creative collaboration.
Right.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a system that encourages and inspires participation, full engagement, that's safe to speak up. And the new competitive advantage comes from the superior intelligence and creativity of the connected team. So that's the art form.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of one of my military peers is General Stanley McChrystal and his team of teams concept, where you look at the organization more as an organism versus a hierarchy, and each team can has autonomous operations, except as the dotted line to the information, flow to the higher headquarters, which is also a team. And the higher headquarters main purpose is to ensure shared vision and shared experience, as well as the autonomous teams understand the boundaries of execution. It's really interesting.
I was briefing the senior fellow of the Institute for Future, and he said, he got through it. He said, this is great. The one instance he's seen in the real world where this has been done is Stanley McChrystal and a team of teams.
Outstanding.
So
have you met him? You would enjoy meeting him.
I've connected with the co-author of the book.
Yeah,
and I mentioned
Chris.
I reviewed,
Chris, what's his name?
I'll have to dig it out.
Right.
McChrystal probably reported to General Abazade. General Abazade was on my board in this Tahoe company, and he and I became good friends. So I'm trying to angle my way towards actually meeting McChrystal. But anyway,
right.
What he does is exactly, the book is complementary to his book because it goes deeper in some aspects. He's got more stories than I have. He's got more stories than you can count. But it's a great book, and it's a great demonstration of this method.
Right. How does one begin to move from an organizational structure and culture that is old model, missionistic, industrial age, management theory, into a team of team / organism network approach?
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be almost easier to start that from scratch than it would be to change a structured culture into that.
It does change. You can change the culture, but that's always a challenge.
Right.
The way I do that is, suppose it's a case where I'm taking over a company like the Tahoe company I just mentioned, been around 25 years. They're run by a psychotic CEO. So
with all due respect, of course.
With all due respect. And so it's not a good starting point in terms of, everybody feeling safe about speaking up.
Right.
But what I would do is I'd take them off, even in the first morning, I took that whole team off to an offsite, and I trained them for 2 or 3 hours. We talked through the whole thing. And
so you introduce kind of the model, the framework, say, hey, this is what your future is going to look like, and either you're on board with it or you're not, kind of thing.
Yeah, there are three principles, 4 practices, and then this 3-layer diagnostic model. So we talk about that. And then we would go back to the office and over a week or so draft on a single piece of paper a statement of principles that are based on the training, but other aspects. And everybody gets to edit, contribute to that document.
Mm-hmm.
When it's finalized, everybody signs it. So now you've got to start. Then I hold weekly all hands meetings, voluntary. There's no, it's not scripted.
Mm-hmm.
And you use that conversation to constantly reinforce. So people come in and say they're doing such and such, or they're having a problem here or the problem there. And you say, well, here's how to address it using the training. And eventually the light goes on. I mean, people start talking about, oh my God, I'm living in an open communication, company, and I can speak up and I don't get shot. And one of the things in that particular case I did was that the CEO kept an employee handbook. And if you caught anybody doing something that he didn't like going to the dentist at 11:30 rather than 12, he would write up another rule in the book. So I told everybody.
He's managing by rules instead of by values and guidelines. Yeah.
And so it's a 200-page document. I asked everybody to print it off. I went to the fire department. I got a fire permit. And we went out in the parking lot, got a big barrel, and everybody burned his or her copy of the employee manual. Never replaced it.
That's awesome. I want to get into this later, the 3 principles and 4 practices a little bit more. But you make a comment, which I just loved, that culture, we've heard of that culture eats strategy for lunch, and then you say mindset eats culture for breakfast. Let's talk about that a bit. That's really cool.
The book introduces the notion of the mindset layer. The mindset layer sits below the culture layer. Now, in high tech, finally, and thankfully, people begin to understand the importance of culture, and that's where the statement that culture eats strategy for lunch I think is correct.
Mhm.
And I went through Stanford and became a great strategist, and I realized that culture was more important.
Mhm.
Um, but the problem is nobody knows how to talk about culture, and so culture is pizza for lunch on Friday, or it's we don't do politics, or other
Mhm.
other aspects of.
People mistake structure for culture,
That's right.
because pizza on Friday is structure. Brown bag lunch learnings is structure.
Right.
Culture is the collective internal sense of self of the team.
Right.
Yeah. Which is really
It's
hard for an individual to put their thumb on, because they don't understand. They're kind of blind to their role in it, and they're blind to other people's biases and projections and shadow
exactly.
elements. Interesting.
So the book says if you want to talk about culture, you cannot talk about culture without first talking about mindset. Mindset is defined as the patterns of thought between the ears of the leaders,
Mhm.
whereas culture are the patterns of behavior between the members of the team. And there are 4 dimensions to mindset that they're archetypal in the sense that we've been using this for more than a decade, where if you assess a company's leadership along these 4 dimensions, you can get a very accurate forecast for the outcome of the company. Tell you a lot of
Interesting.
it. And the 4 dimensions are agility, relatedness, awareness, and courage.
Right.
And this is all in the book.
Mhm.
In each of those has an intellectual and an emotional dimension. So I use one example. Intellectual agility says, okay, we got a product roadmap. We're pursuing that. We discovered that that's not the right roadmap. I had this experience, and you turn on a dime. You change the roadmap, and you're off on a new path. That's intellectual agility.
Mhm. Mhm.
Emotional agility is different. It's coming. Somebody comes to you with a point of view, and you don't even agree with them. You may not like them, and yet you're open to really hear what they have to say and to work with that and be
Mhm.
open to that kind of collaboration. That's emotional agility.
Right. That's what
Now
you call complementarity, or
that's complementarity. That's an example of complementarity. It's both
interesting.
and.
Both and, right. Where
And
it's not what I like you said is, it's not moving beyond agree to disagree, which is shutting down the conversation.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's,
Interesting.
now, in the 4 dimensions, there's a notion of the weak dimension, and that's where dysfunctionality comes into the organization. So you could be strong, and I've seen it. They had a company that was strong on agility, weak on courage, but strong in the other dimensions, and they were stuck.
Mhm.
So to really understand how the company's going to perform, you need to look at the balance among those 4 dimensions, and then that from that you can build an effective culture. But that's why we say mindset eats culture for breakfast,
Mhm.
because if you don't have it right, you're not going to have a good culture.
Mhm. Are these 4 domains, whatever you call them, are those the diagnostic model?
Yeah, that's right. The diagnostic model is a 3-layer model. There's the enterprise at the top, which is the business strategy and the intellectual stuff. The middle is cultural layer, and then the bottom is mindset, and
Mindset. Okay.
it's a bottom up model. So, and
Interesting.
that goes way beyond what they teach you in business school in terms of what's important.
Definitely. So, with regards to, let me put it this way, one of the things that we really try to build upon in our program is the foundation for what we call the 7 commitments of an elite team are courage, trust, and respect. And I think
Nice.
you talk about a high trust, low fear environment. So trust seems to be a recurring theme.
Mhm.
And that comes from having a safe environment where it's safe to, to challenge people, which is kind of what we were just talking about. It's safe to
Mhm.
disagree, but
Mhm.
also not feel shut down because your boss says, oh, okay, we agree to disagree, but
Yeah, right.
yeah. Okay. So let's
Exactly.
talk more about trust. How do we build trust in a team? And is that start? It probably starts with mindset, and then from there it leaks into the culture just naturally. I'm
That's
thinking.
that's right. And the principles or practices are geared towards inspiring trust
Hmm.
in psychological safety, which is a factor that Google did a massive, I mean, you're probably aware of this, but this massive survey to figure out what was the most important factor for supporting innovation. The answer number 1 was psychological safety.
Mm.
And so that's consistent with what the book's talking about, is create an environment where people will speak up.
Right.
And that's where the best ideas come from. I mean, it's the McChrystal
I
experience.
wonder, psychological safety, is that inclusive of emotional safety in your
Oh, yeah.
opinion?
I think
Okay,
it's primarily emotional safety. Yeah.
right. It's interesting that they use that term, psychological safety,
Yeah.
which to me seems to be really about cognition as opposed to emotional awareness.
And it's not their term. It was previously described by Edmondson at Harvard. She talks about psychological safety as well.
Right. It's so interesting to me how like management theory, leadership theories get kind of trapped by the language of the academics.
Oh, yeah.
When, it's really a little bit devoid, because what we're really talking about, I want to get into, is emotional intelligence, like, and what that is. Like, now we're stuck with emotional IQ because of Goldman's work, but it goes, that starts, even IQ is an unfortunate term to use.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds intellectual.
It sounds intellectual, right? And so people read the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, social, emotional, and whatever.
Yeah, right.
Social skills, individual skills, and individual awareness, and they think, okay, I got this, right? I'm aware of this stuff. But awareness, we were talking before we started, emotional awareness, emotional control, emotional skill, right? Being able to actually work with your emotions and not, be shut down or repress or reject or project, right? Yourself or others, right? That's a whole nother thing. And then you also mentioned emotional integrity. So let's talk about this. Like, how does a leader or a leadership team, if they want to really have the right mindset, also have to have the emotional, mindset, which is the flip side of the cognitive mindset.
Right. Yeah, the awareness has complementary dimensions. And to talk about the other job of the CEO, besides the strategy and the positioning and market and all that kind of stuff, is understanding what's really going on in the team and to value that. Do people communicate? Do they trust each other? Are there, if you're looking at slippage is drama, and slippage are, signs that it is not working. There's something going wrong. So what's going on? Where
What's
are people
slippage
stuck?
in your opinion?
Well, we're working with a partner now that's slipped a year on their product development plan in a year. I mean, that's hard to do, but that's not uncommon, especially in software. So that's where people make a commitment and they don't honor the commitment. So to get them to be conscious of the notion of an authentic commitment versus a false commitment.
Oh boy, we've had a lot of slippage in my organization, and we teach this stuff. That's why I know this is hard, right?
It is hard.
It's easier to teach it than it is to implement it.
But we teach that false commitments lead to dramatization of the organization. That's part of what the training is. When you make a false commitment, you are going to create drama, and that's going to be sand in the gears for execution.
Are people aware of a false commitment when they make it? Do you think?
Often
do you think
not.
They're good intentioned.
They're good intention. It's sometimes we call it the hallway salute. We'll go along with the program. Yeah, I'll take care of that, and they don't think. We talk about honoring doubt. Any serious commitment is preceded by some level of doubt. So you've got to allow people time to think it through and make it, because now the emphasis is on accurate, authentic commitments.
Right.
Don't come into this. You got an action item list from an executive staff meeting. Don't come in next week and tell me that you slipped on it. You knew on Friday. This is Tuesday. You knew on Friday is a slip. You got to bring it up right then.
Right.
So it's a big deal. Authentic commitments becomes a really big deal. And we use, for example, you avoid forced commitments. So if you say somebody, well, when are you going to get that done? And they're not sure about what they can do it, you give a date for a date. Say, well, if you can't give me a date, you need to think about it. What's a date when you will have a date? And that shows up on the action item list as a date for a date, a D4D. And it's a very effective way of letting people, now you closed it. You got closure. Because
otherwise these things the can just keep getting kicked down the road, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've seen that.
So
Lots.
that helps trust a lot.
Fascinating. You talk about, and this is related to setting those dates and getting clear about deep commitment, like a no shit commitment versus, a maybe commitment, is idealized expectations and idealized fantasies. Let's talk about that.
Right. One of the three principles is non-attachment, and this is to address the problem of idealized expectations, which we describe as cancer of the mind. So this is you in this new leadership model. You want creative collaboration. You want open flow, creativity, avoiding dogmatic thinking. When you get to dogmatic expressions in the team, you stop the creative flow.
Right.
The one reason that you get dogmatic statements is somebody sitting there saying, I have the superior answer here. This is the only way we can do this thing. And they state it. That's their idealized
my way or the highway thinking. Yeah.
My way or the highway. So they're attached to some expectation. And we're saying those attachments are what, stand on the gears again towards having the creative process provide a better answer than the one that you happen to be attached to.
And is that also a fantasy, or how does a fantasy, fantasy differ than an idealized expectation?
They're synonymous, but we use the fantasy to convey the pejorative aspect and our contempt for how people think that way.
Yeah, I see.
They're in a fantasy mind. Get out of your fantasy.
Yeah, well, I've seen that play out a lot is lack of awareness around a competency or competency, skills, and the totality of what's involved in a commitment.
Right.
Which is why I love that date for a date is that's time for you to go do your homework.
Yeah,
see what's going to be involved before you take this commitment on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating. What are some of the tools to break down those barriers around idealized expectations? And I love this idea that a my way, the highway is like putting up a mental wall, a mindset wall against that creative flow. It's like, let's build this freaking cement wall in front between you and the team where they just turn their back and say, okay, whatever.com,
Right. Exactly.
Not much going to happen here. So how do we break down those walls?
Well, a number of things. We could talk about the principles and practices, but there's another, I think, key part of the book that I found to be incredibly helpful, and that's called this is how you do empathy. People talk about empathy, including in the EI material, but they don't explain how to do it. So here's how you do empathy. And this is complementarity because it's empathy and challenge together. So if you want to, so you got two people, you want to have a conversation, you maybe you violently disagree going into the conversation. You elicit willingness to talk about it. And then the process is one side is allowed to completely download their point of view, front to back, top to bottom, no interruption, encourage completion, make sure it's completed. The other side then does something very unnatural, which is to find something about what the person's point of view and their position that they can agree with. And they state it out loud. It has to be out loud. Now, that's experienced by the ego as a defeat. You just gave up ground. I mean, I served under General Patton Jr. General Patton Jr. gave me an award at Fort Knox. Patton said, never give up real estate. Well, you just gave up real estate. So it feels like a defeat from an ego perspective. The other person experiences that as being seen and heard to some extent. Being seen and heard is one of the top four things that people want from their leadership.
So you give a little to gain a lot.
And then you switch to, and you repeat it. Now you come out of that with two people with two perspectives together in each mind. And that creates the setting for finding a third path.
Yes, I love that. We call that perspective making in our program.
Cool.
But it's not easy, because if someone is stuck in a rigid thinking or fixed thinking mindset, then and the other is willing to make a new perspective, then it's a one-way street.
It is.
So how, again, with the more intractable fixed mindset leaders that you've worked with, how do we break them out of this idea that they can be, collaborative, and their way isn't always the highway, and there's always a way to find a third win or a middle path.
In the training, you forbid the use of the word "but," and you send them off to do a little role playing test.
Mm-hmm.
They will come back over and over again and say the hardest thing was to stop saying "but." I can see your point of view, but okay, well, start over.
Right.
And agree to disagree is another statement of failure,
Right.
declaration of failure. So you train that. You also show them. There's a high-end tech software company. I had a Nobel laureate on the board, a famous guy from Stanford, economics professor. Spent $32 million before I walked in the door. They were stuck on a product decision for 9 months. They could not make the decision. We cleared it up in 20 minutes. Because the underlying factor was the guy was head of technical support, the woman was head of product management, and they hated each other. And so you had to get to the emotion. What's the basis for the contempt, and resolve that, and then the rest of it flowed naturally. The book talks about complementary partnering or twinning, and so you can assign people you're now going to be twins. Some people don't like the term. We like the term. Screw it. We're going to call them twins. So you guys, the two of them, we said, you guys are now twins. You are making an unconditional commitment to the other person's well-being. You're going to cover the other person's back. You're going to keep them informed. You're going to talk every day. And you are going to have a very tight partnership. So they went off and did this and fell in love. That's
awesome.
A little, consequent, unintended side effect, but nevertheless, it worked for the company.
One thing that I've been plagued with because of my upbringing was attracting narcissists into key roles in my organization because I didn't trust myself enough to either hire the right people or to do the work myself. And I think that narcissism it plays a huge role in people seeking leadership roles, right? And I've seen that. And of course, you see that across the governmental spectrum, the seeking of it. Like for me, leadership should be either conveyed or it should happen naturally, right? Because of your character and being in the right place at the right time, or being the strongest, one in the block right there. Emotionally, that is. So how do we deal with narcissists? Have you had success in unlocking potential and bringing narcissists along, or should we identify and kind of move them along?
The book declares, which I believe, that narcissism is root cause for all dysfunctionality. It is at the bottom of the stack.
Yeah, our narcissism is like hyper identification with your ego, which is highly defended, right? And so then you're getting projected, and you get all these distorted behaviors. Try to defend that.
The book goes back to ancient myths in order to understand human behavior, and one of the core myths, there's several, is the myth of Narcissus.
Right.
Now everybody knows about that, falling in love and looking at reflection in the water and falling in the water and drowning and the narcissus flower and all that kind of thing. The point about that myth is not so much that, is the fact that the narcissist could not take input, would not take input from anybody. The narcissistic leader is the one that will not take input from the marketplace or from the team. He's stuck with an idealized fantasy about what things should be and refuses input. That is the root of all evil, I think. And we talk about if that's the case, then the mandate is what the book calls the surrender of the ego.
Right.
You've got to let go of that and to be open to reality and the perspective of the team and honor that. So
that takes deep commitment to emotional work.
That's right.
Years of therapy, or that's my experience anyways. I know some people can have spontaneous emotional enlightenment, but it's usually not the case.
The shortcut is, if you get to the connected team, the other people on the team are not screwed up in the same neurotic way you are. And so they'll correct.
You're talking about me, of course.
No. the
I'm
generalized,
telling you, you're talking about me.
we're talking about me too.
Check.
But the point is that the team is they may have other problems, but they're not screwed up in the same way we are, and they'll correct it.
Right.
If you allow that, to be open to their input, they'll tell you when you're going neurotic again or narcissistic again.
Right.
That saves a decade of therapy.
Right.
I mean, everybody could use a little therapy, but
Totally agree. One of the things that we're doing, you might find interesting with our leaders who bring their organizational teams into, our program, which we call Unbeatable Mind. You can see that behind me.
mm-hmm.
Is we put them into a developmental boat crew or small team. So you got their company teams that are focused on company stuff, organizational stuff, but then they're in this other team, which actually might be the same group, but they're not focused on the company vision, mission, values, execution stuff. They're focused on their own growth as individuals and as a team, unlocking the potential, having those brutal conversations, and they have a facilitator who's a certified coach. And we're finding huge success with this because
that's cool.
They begin to break down those barriers, those narcissistic or the ego barriers, because the leader then begins to recognize that they're the limiting factor, because they're getting this direct and honest feedback because it's safe and it's a facilitated environment.
Yep. That's cool.
So that's a pretty cool model that we're just kind of unfolded, and we're bringing from the SEAL teams that model, because everyone in the SEAL team is part of a team, and that team has a senior leader, who's not the officer, who's the senior enlisted advisor, who's like the coach. And the most junior guys have every bit as much say as the senior guys. And if the senior guy is the one who screwed up, which, as you're aware, a lot of times it's the officer who thought their shit didn't stink all along because they just kept getting promoted, or you know what I mean? How that works in the military, the Peter principle. They get called out and they have to either develop or end up leaving the organization.
That's a great approach. That's exactly in line with what the book talks about. That's a really wonderful way to implement that.
Yeah.
To bring that to life.
We're kind of nearing the end of this, the time that we have here, but I'd love to go back and address, the framework of the 3 principles, 4 practices, and the diagnostic model, just to kind of reframe it up for the listeners so they can be like, I want to learn more about that and go get this book and dig into this a little bit deeper.
Sure. So the 3 principles, and you're not going to find this in much leadership, intellectual leadership books, but the 3 principles are complementarity, which is both and thinking. Okay. And the argument, the complementarity, it's not this or that, it's this and that. Shows up in nature. It shows up in quantum mechanics, shows up in DNA, it shows up in electromagnetism. It's apparently a basic rule of nature. The issue is, how do you apply it to leadership? And the book talks about how to do that. We've talked a little bit about that. The second one is empathy, of course. That's a glue. But we talk about emotional intelligence, but we go beyond that to emotional integrity, which is an advance, I think, on the EI dialogue. The third one is non-attachment, which we've talked about before. Right. So you got 3 underlying, that's at the bottom of the stack. Okay. Then there are 4 practices: communication, collaboration, commitment, and closure. Now, they sound like normal practices. The point we make is there's a lot about implementing those things that are an art form, and the book talks about that. An example was what we just talked about, a date for date, and the notion of a false commitment, avoiding false commitment, all that kind of stuff. That's all laid out at the practice level. And then you got the 3-layer diagnostic model. It's kind of a pyramid. The bottom layer is mindset. That's where that drives the next layer up, culture. So you can't talk about culture without going to the mindset first. The culture then delivers performance at the strategy level and the business level. So those are the 3 big chunks of the book.
I can see how all those are self-reinforcing. Right. That's terrific. I love it. And I love this notion of looking at leadership and team building as a practice. Right? Yeah. Something that, the old model was forming, storming, norming, performing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right,
it's like, okay, like that just happens. And it will happen, but you never get to the performing part. That's the problem.
It's
stuck at storming,
Yeah, the book says how to. How do you do this?
Yeah,
step by step.
Get there? That's awesome. Yeah, and that's all. Basically, our lives are a how-to, and backed by a strong why. So we got it.
Exactly.
We're constantly practicing every day. And if we're not
I love it.
practicing, then someone else is practicing on us and we're becoming
That's
something that we shouldn't, right?
That's right. Exactly.
In
Yeah.
closure, what's your view of the future? Either social culturally or for organizational leaders. What do you think's happening?
Oh man. Um, I don't know.
Right? I know.
It's the book is in the previous book was careful to stay to the business scope,
Yeah.
but it's clear that this material has a much broader
Yeah.
application.
Because we're talking about developing next generation of leaders who can be more emotionally connected. And when, I think that disconnection from self led to disconnection from others, what led to disconnection from nature led to the
Yeah,
shitstorm that we have today.
I agree with you. And
Yeah.
this being stuck in the partisan dialogue without finding solutions together that's just about idealized fantasy and power positions. And
Right.
so I think when I started the book, I was talking to a publisher. He said, "What do you want to do with this book?" I said, not entirely tongue-in-cheek, start a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that it was underway already. The book talks about intimations of the new leadership model, which is way outside of just business.
Mm-hmm.
And one author estimates that 13% of leaders now actually use the open system, 87% don't. And so the 87% is going to have a much higher failure rate.
Right.
This movement towards this is inexorable,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to take time. And I think that applies to how we deal with the global issues today. It's not just running a better business.
Right. I agree. Yeah. People are demanding social impact, environmental sustainability, conscious capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And employees are demanding, to feel more engaged and to be part of the team and to be respected, and diversity and,
Exactly.
inclusiveness and all this. And so that
Right.
all can't be prescribed as a structural Band-Aid. It has to be felt and experienced from within the mindset
Exactly.
and the culture. So we got to change the people. Like Gandhi said, you want to be the change, you got to, see the change, you got to be the change.
Nice.
I love what you're doing. We have a similar vision to bring 100 million to this path that we call Unbeatable Mind, which is a path of vertical development. It's character development at physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual level.
I love it. I love it.
So I think that our work is very aligned. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Oh, Tom. Absolutely.
You're doing great work.
Yeah, it'd be great. Really appreciate the time and really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, I did too. So thank you. And hopefully we'll get to talk again and meet in person. Maybe we'll see you on the slopes up in Northwood or come visit. I love it. All right, Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, that was Tom Steding. Go check out his work. Real teams wins. It's real teams win. What smart leaders need to know now about achieving peak performance. And also build on trust, which is his original book, Gaining Competitive Advantage in Any Organization. But the conversation we had is really important. So, listen to this, share this episode with your peers, go buy his book. How can we connect with you, or how can listeners connect to you beyond the book, Tom?
You can reach me at tom@realteamswin.com anytime. So I'm having signed conversations. The book's on, all the major booksellers.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Tom@realteamwins.com.
Cool.
Do you have any social media or you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm going to have to learn how to use social media. And so
yeah, you know what? Just wait for a little bit, because maybe Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram won't be such a force in a a few years.
Exactly.
It'll be something else. People are kind of ticked at those guys.
Yeah, they sure are.
All right, Tom. Thanks again. All right. Thanks everybody else for listening. I really appreciate your time and energy, and thanks for supporting the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Like I said earlier, if you value this work, then please rate it. Hopefully with the far right click, which you start with the 5th star. All the rest of them light up when you do that. Love that. Saves you time. And pay it forward. So stay focused and be unbeatable. Hoo-yah.